So I was going to read The Magic School Bus because we have several of those books, and in moving and everything else, none of our books are unpacked, and I cannot find them at all. And here comes my child. Hi. You're a punk. Come here. Come here. Come sit and read. Maybe. We're in bed because I thought in my room she probably would leave me alone. How wrong I was. Can you read? Nope, you can't play with the baby, you gotta read. So instead of The Magic School Bus, I will be reading the first chapter of book 2 in the Chronicles of Narnia. The 5th grade class actually has this as a read aloud. This is for a grade. She says, I don't care. But I got this book very young, and I loved them. And I didn't care for the movies when they came out, but that's why books are better anyway. Hey. See the baby? I am going to read the dedication because I think that it's awesome. Hey, no, sit down and read or get out of the bedroom. Sit down and read or go play in the living room. Okay, so the dedication to Lucy Barfield. My dear Lucy, I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales, and by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear, too old to understand a word you say. But still, I shall be your affectionate godfather, C.S. Lewis. Come here, are you going to sit and read with me? No, she's fighting a nap. So, she's going to lay down and hopefully go to sleep. I read Chapter 1, Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife and lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man, with shaggy white hair which grew over most of his face, as well as on his head, and they liked him, almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good-night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room, and they all talked it over. We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake, said Peter. This is going to be perfectly splendid. The old chap will let us do anything we like. I think he's an old dear, said Susan. Oh, come off it, said Edmund, who was tired of pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. Like what? Said Susan. And anyway, it's time that you were in bed. Trying to talk like mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say when I'm going to bed? Go to bed yourself. Hadn't we all better go to bed, said Lucy. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. No, there won't, said Peter. I'll tell you, this is the sort of the house where no one's gonna mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms. The thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. It's only a bird, silly. Avis Luann. It's only a bird, silly, said Edmund. There, it's an owl, said Peter. It's going to be a wonderful place for birds. Kid. I shall go to bed now, I say. Let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There will be hawks. Badgers, said Lucy. Foxes, said Edmund. Rabbits, said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Child. Had this propping up my phone so you could see me. Hey, no! Stop! Of course it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them. A long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore in the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. Child! Stop it. Tara wants to see me read. Yeah. She wants to see you listen, too. This book's a little beyond your understanding. You want the blanket? There, you can have it. There's the blanket. There's your bottle. It was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led to only spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected they would, but soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and where they found a suit of armor, and then after that a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner. Then Avis Luann. With a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and a kind of Avis Luann. Then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony. Then a whole series of rooms that led into each other that were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than the Bible in church. And shortly after that they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all, except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. Nothing there, said Peter, and they all troped out again. Except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking to the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats, rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and hey... She's trying to get into my drink. Sit and read with me. Sit and read with me. Life of a mom. She kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as to not bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers. But she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of coats aside to make room for her. Hey. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something very soft and powdery and extremely cold. Okay, you can't have that. Go to your dad! Go to your dad! Thank you, honey. So much fun. She felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went a step or 2 further. The next moment, she found what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. "Why, it is just like branches of trees!" exclaimed Lucy. Then she saw that there was a light ahead of her. Not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood, at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, even had to catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it would be a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward. Crunch, crunch. Over the snow and through the wood towards the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it was a lamp. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of the wood, wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her. And soon after that a very strange person stepped out from amongst the trees in the light of the lamp-post. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upwards he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat hooves, but he also had a tail. Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair. Out of the hair stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his arm. He carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked as if he had just been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all of his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn.